Hello and welcome to Game Education. This video is about the Fire Mage in Legion. And what I'm going to go over are the passives, the talents, the rotation, and at the end then some tricks. And also the weapon traits. Sorry, I forgot about that. So the first three passives I want to go over are Critical Mass, Enhanced Pyrotechnics, and Hot Streak. Critical mass is pretty simple. It just means you have more critical strike chance and more critical strike stat from everything. So if you get 1000 critical strike stat from something, because of this passive, that then becomes 1100, an extra 10%. Pretty easy to understand. Enhanced Pyrotechnics gives you 10% increased critical strike chance on your fireball every time it does not crit. So usually fire mages have about 50% crit, and if your fireball does not crit when you cast it, that then becomes a 60% chance. It does not crit again, it becomes 70%, and so on. Basically, this just ensures that your fireball will crit more often than not. And finally, Hot Streak, which is the ability that the fire mage is kind of built around. After you get 2 direct damage critical strikes, your next Pyroblast or Flame Strike is instant cast and does double the normal Ignite damage. Ignite is your mastery. So you do damage over time to the enemy equivalent to a percentage of the direct damage that you did. So when you're using your Pyroblast from Hot Streak, it's going to do double the Ignite damage. So instead of 20%, it's going to do 40% of its damage over 9 seconds, okay? And Ignite actually stacks. So the more often you are hitting enemies with your spells and with Hot Streak, that Ignite damage can really build up pretty high. So those are the three passives I wanted to show you first. And the next thing we're going to look at quickly are some weapon traits that we need to be aware of. And there are about 3. The other ones are generally just extra damage, but there are 3 that require some extra attention. The first one is Paretic Incantation. So each consecutive critical strike you deal increases the critical strike damage you deal by 2%. So this generally comes into play when you're using Combustion and all of your spells are going to be critical hits. So using Combustion and your normal rotation, you could get about 10 critical hits in a row. Now because this stacks, that would then mean that your next spell, as long as Combustion is still on and it ensures that your next spell will be a critical hit, that means that your next spell will have plus 20% extra critical strike damage. Now that's nice, okay, so that means what, my Pyroblast will do 20%? Yes, but you should use Meteor. Meteor does the most single target damage out of any of your other spells. You can see here 1 million damage as compared to Pyroblast's 460,000. So using Meteor at the end of your 10 consecutive critical hits will mean that Meteor will do an extra 20% critical hit damage. So on top of its 1 million, which is then also then a critical hit, which is then also increased by 20%, your Meteor can really hit hard. And considering you're using it after you've already just used your burst rotation, it's pretty much just like a finisher. There are not many people that can withstand this full rotation and then a Meteor on top of their head. The next trait I wanted to look at was Cauterizing Blink. So this heals you for 20% of your maximum health over 6 seconds when you blink. That's really nice. I have 5 million health, so 20% of that is a million. So using Blink will heal me for 1 million health. And because I have the Shimmer talent, I can blink twice. So over 12 seconds I can get 2 million health back. So effectively that means that I don't have 5 million health, I have 7 million as long as I'm using my blink effectively. And you should, because that is really helpful, and the other specs do not get any self heals. And the last one is Scorched Earth. So casting Scorch grants you 5% movement speed, and this stacks 5 times. So cast Scorch 5 times, get 25% increased movement speed. That's okay, it's nothing special, but you can combine it with another talent to make it into something interesting, which I'll have a look at a little bit later. So now, having done these passives and the weapon traits, the next thing up are the talents. So I'm just going to go down each level here and explain what they do and why they're effective, or when they're effective, or for what kind of situations you want to take one over the other. So the first level here is Pyromaniac, Conflagration, and Firestarter. Firestarter is pretty shit because it only works when the target is above 90% health. So for example, in PvP or raids, it's very unlikely that your targets are going to be above 90% health, and so that means that when your targets are not above 90% health, you effectively have no talent here. You're getting no benefits whatsoever, and that's what makes it so crappy. So that leaves the other two. Conflagration is only for Fireball, and it's just having Fireball deal extra fire damage over time. It also allows Conflagration or Ignite to have a 10% chance to flare up and then also deal extra damage. So in terms of fights where you're casting Fireball a lot, this talent becomes more effective there. So that would be things like raids. On the other hand, Pyromaniac is really nice and fun to use, to be honest. Much more fun than just a passive that does passive damage. Pyromaniac gives you an 8% chance to instantly reactivate Hot Streak. So that means you could be casting Pyroblast instantly because you have Hot Streak, and suddenly you can cast it again. And you cast it, and suddenly you can even cast it again. You can get Pyromaniac proc twice in a row for 2 extra instant cast Pyroblasts or Flame Strikes. And that can be really nice in the right situation. And I'd definitely say it's more fun than just some passive damage. But it's up to you which one you want to take. Just don't take Firestarter, basically. On the second level here, we have the Super Duper Shimmer. And it's hard to beat an extra blink, to be honest, especially when you're combining it with the weapon trait that gives you 20% of your health when you blink. So instead of just 20%, having 2 blinks means you can get 40% back, and that is huge, especially for a class that actually has no healing abilities. The other options are Blast Wave, which is an old vanilla spell that mages used to have. It's okay, it has its uses, but it's hard to say is better than an extra blink. And we have Blazing Soul. This means that fire damage you deal to targets within 8 yards of you refills your blazing barrier for 40% of the damage done. That's okay, but usually it's just used for, say, PvE, where you really need that shield to take down some tough mob or boss. So you can just sit there and blow your cooldowns with your blazing barrier up, and you should have enough damage to keep your barrier up and not take any damage. I guess you could also use it against some melees, or if you can keep your enemies within those 8 yards, this could keep your blazing barrier up. It could, it could keep a lot of health. It could protect you quite a significant amount if it's used effectively. But it's hard, really, really hard to beat an extra blink. There are so many things you can do with blink. So I always take Shimmer. I never change this talent. On the third level, we have Mirror Image, Rune of Power, and Incanter's Flow. And these two are basically just activate to do more damage. Incanter's Flow is different in that you don't have to do anything to do extra damage. Basically, whenever you are in combat, you have a minimum of 4% increased damage all the way up to 20% increased damage. And this never changes. As long as you are in combat, you will permanently deal at least 4% more damage. No activations, no remembering, no casting, no nothing, just always more damage. And that's what makes Incanter's Flow basically superior to these other two for fire. Because you need to be running around and casting and focusing on your fire rotation rather than having to remember to use these to actually get that extra damage. Having Incanter's Flow is just always there, and you don't have to worry about anything except doing your damage. So I also never change this one either. On the fourth level here, we have Alexstrasza's Fury, Flame On, and Controlled Burn. Flame On reduces the cooldown of Fire Blast by 2 seconds and increases the maximum number of charges by 1. Now, Fire Blast is actually really a core component of your hold rotation and the whole way Fire Mage plays. You need your Fire Blasts and your Phoenix's Flames to complete the warming up, to get the Hot Streak, to get the Pyroblasts and the Flame Strikes. So having a reduced cooldown on Fire Blast and also having an extra charge of it makes this ability so much better than anything else on this level. Controlled Burn gives you a 20% chance to activate Hot Streak when after you've done a critical hit. Okay, that's 1 in 5, but it's only a chance, and it's random. It's hard to predict for it. You know, normally you want to be able to predict as well as you can what crits are going to happen and when, so that you know which buttons to line up, which spells to line up to come next. You don't want to be waiting half a second in between each cast to see if you get Controlled Burn so that you can activate it. It's just inefficient. And Alexstrasza's Fury, well, this gives some bonuses to Dragon's Breath. Dragon's Breath really you only use for the interrupt, or well, that's it really, the interrupt and the disorient, that's it. So in terms of these three, nothing beats Flame On. It increases your DPS, it's reliable, it's always there. So I never change this one either. Now this level here, actually you can change a lot, and this is what I was talking about earlier with the weapon trait that increases your speed when you cast Scorch. So we see that when you cast Scorch, this talent will increase your movement speed by 30%, and the weapon trait will also increase it by up to 25% if you cast it 5 times. So altogether that'd be 55% movement speed bonus. And considering you can also cast Scorch while moving, this is the ability that you use to catch people that are running away, basically. You can start chasing them and casting Scorch at the same time. As soon as you cast it, you've got a 35%, 30 here and 5 from the weapon, 35% increased movement speed to start running after them and chasing them, and you can keep casting Scorch to keep increasing that by 5% all the way up to 55%. So this is a really nice ability for chasing. It's unbeatable for chasing, basically, for a Fire Mage anyway. The other two, though, they do also have good sides and advantages. Frost Nova has 2 charges rather than 1. Excellent. I mean, you know what Frost Nova is for, now you can use it twice. And Ring of Frost, which is kind of like zone control that you can use at range. The problem is that you have to cast it, so you have to stand still for 1.6 seconds to get some use out of this. Whereas with Frenetic Speed, you know, your Scorch cast is only 1.2 seconds. It's pretty fast and hard to interrupt, and this gives you excellent chase. I find I have few opportunities to use Ring of Frost, to be honest, but sometimes when you do get a nice enclosed location, a tunnel, a doorway, you know, usually it's going to be in a battleground, sometimes an arena, where you can use this and either force enemies to go around it or put it where they're about to be so that they get incapacitated. So at this level you can really change depending on what you want to do or what your preference is. And on this level here we have Living Bomb, Unstable Magic and Flame Patch. Now generally I will only choose between these two and never Flame Patch, because Flame Patch just does some extra damage over time for Flame Strike, not that useful. Unstable Magic, however, improves the DPS of your Fireball, and generally you want to use this for single target damage because that's when you're going to be using a lot of Fireballs. So especially for raids, Unstable Magic is superior to the other two by a large margin. And I would also usually take this in PvP because you do end up casting Fireball, you know, a fair amount, and if you get that 50% extra damage and it also crits, that's a really nice Fireball hit. Living Bomb you take for AoE. So, you know, if you're going to have a big AoE fight, sometimes in some battlegrounds it can be useful, but rarely. Generally you want to use this for mythics, and when you get a lot of adds, the more adds you have, the more damage this does, basically, because this can hit all adds and then all of them will all explode for AoE damage. So you have 20 mobs and you hit one of them with this and you're going to see your DPS just go into the ridiculous regions, basically. But in general, unless I'm doing mythics, I'll probably just take Unstable Magic most of the time for that increased DPS on Fireball. And on the last level here we have Meteor, Cinderstorm and Kindling. Kindling is just a passive that reduces the cooldown on your combustion. So it's bringing your combustion back sooner, so you can do your burst rotation sooner and increasing your DPS that way. It works, but it's kind of dull. Whereas you have these two choices, two nice new spells that look cool, especially Meteor, a giant flaming rock falling from the sky. What's not to love, right? So Cinderstorm is it's focused on AoE damage, okay, and the damage is increased if the target is affected by your ignite. So if you can get AoE damage on a bunch of enemies and they're all ignited and then you use Cinderstorm, your AoE damage is going to be really nice, especially if you're combining it with Living Bomb. The problem is that Fire Mage already does such good AoE damage, I find it hard to justify taking another spell that will increase their AoE damage. Generally, Fire Mage's weakness lies in single target damage, and that's what Meteor can do quite well. So I also never change these talents, and I always keep Meteor. So that's it for all of the normal talents, and now I'm going to look at the honor talents. So on the first level here we have Gladiator's Medallion, which generally tends to be the one you should take. You know, every 2 minutes you can interrupt a stun or a sleep or a slow or a root or a fucking anything basically, and you can choose what it is and you can choose what you want to interrupt, which is generally where its utility comes from. If you compare to Adaptation, Adaptation does something similar except it's passive, and it will remove any loss of control effect with a duration of 5 seconds or more. Okay, now that's really the shitty part of this ability, and also kind of its strength at the same time. So if a rogue stuns you for 4.7 seconds, then this ability will do absolutely nothing because it's not 5 seconds. If someone stuns you or roots you or anything for less than 5 seconds, you're not going to have any abilities to deal with it. Whereas with Gladiator's Medallion, although the cooldown is longer, 2 minutes compared to 1 minute, you can choose, okay? And that's where its power comes from. That's why you should always take Medallion over Adaptation. Relentless. So it reduces incoming crowd control effects by 20%. It reduces all of them. Okay, that's okay, but if you really need to get out of a sticky situation, it's not going to help you. Gladiator's Medallion is what's going to get you out of a sticky situation compared to the other two. It's reliable and it's use it when you want to use it, and it's get out of jail free basically. So always take this, and I always take it. On the second level here we have Train of Thought, Mind Quickness, and Initiation. Initiation is shit because it only works on targets at or above 80% health, and it's still, even above 80% health, it's only 30% increased crit. I mean, that's not a guaranteed crit, and it's only on targets above 80% health. If they're below that, then you have effectively no talent at this level, and it's a waste. So never take it, basically. The other one is Train of Thought, damage increased by 15%. Well, that sounds really, really nice. The problem is that it's a PvP talent, and in PvP, someone's probably going to be hitting you, so that this talent will do nothing. So we have a choice of a talent that does nothing, another talent that does nothing, or we have increased haste by 6% all the time. That's not a difficult choice to make. It's always going to be Mind Quickness. Third level, we have two main choices, Netherwind Armor or Prismatic Cloak. Burning Determination is kind of too conditional to be good. It only works after being interrupted while casting a spell. So you can understand that this talent starts to be more useful in, say, duels and arena, where you're definitely going to be interrupted, as compared to, say, a battleground, where quite often you can just run around and cast and you can be left alone. But even then, it's conditional, whereas compared to these other two that are not conditional and are also quite strong. So Netherwind Armor reduces the chance you will suffer a critical hit by 15%. That's really nice. 15% less critical hits on you. I mean, there's nothing you can complain about there, basically. And Prismatic Cloak, which means you take 50% less magical damage for 2 seconds after you blink. So this is really, really good versus, obviously, enemies that use magic damage. But an example I like to use is if an Ice Mage is casting Glacial Spike at you, and you know that can do in the millions of damage. So you can have this talent and you can blink, so when it hits you it does 50% less damage, and also because of your weapon trait you are then also recovering 20% of your health too. So that goes nicely against magical enemies, and this goes, this is better against enemies that use a lot of critical hits. And on the 4th level here we have the amazing temporal shield. For 6 seconds all the damage you take will be given back to you after those 6 seconds. Wow. So if you use this right before an enemy uses their burst, you effectively nullify their burst. You get all the health back that they just destroyed, and that can really fuck them up and win you a fight or a duel a lot of the time if you use it well. The other two, dampen magic. Magical damage over time deal 20% less damage to you. That's okay, but really for me to take this it would have to be more than that, because temporal shield is all damage and it's also giving you back that health, you know? There are very few conditions on this. This has to be magical damage, and it has to be over time. So magical damage that's a direct hit? No. Other kinds of damage over time? No. Only magical damage, and only magical damage over time, 20% less. It's too conditional to be effective, basically. And Kleptomania. Spell Steal now has a 30-second cooldown, but it steals all the spells from the target. This is really, really good. So if you look at Spell Steal normally, it steals a beneficial magic effect from the target. Okay? For 2 minutes. But if you have this, you can steal all the beneficial magic effects. All of them. So sometimes when you look at a druid or a priest or whatever, and you see, oh, look at all those buffs and stuff they have. If you have this, you just take them. And that can really mess with them. A lot of people don't expect it. But in that way, it's only effective against those kinds of classes. Against warriors and stuff like that, not so much. And that's why Temporal Shield tends to be better overall. But you can change between these depending on what you're doing. And especially if you're dueling and you know who you're going to be fighting, you can change these according to what you need to do. So on to the second to last level here. We have Flare Up, which is another Fire Blast improving talent, which of course you have to take. Fire Blast is just too integral to a Fire Mage's damage and rotation for you to not take any Fire Blast talents, basically. So extra charges, 1 extra charge, so instead of 3 it'll be 4, and also using Fire Blast on a target not afflicted by your Ignite refunds the charge. So that means when you run into a big group fight in Battleground, for example, you can just spam Fire Blast and tab to next target Fire Blast, and then you've already got your Hot Streak, cast your Pyro Blast or Flame Strike, and then keep pressing Fire Blast and tab until you've gone through all the enemies and you haven't used up any of your Fire Blasts, but you should have still got about 2 or 3 free Pyro Blasts or Flame Strikes off. It's a bit cheesy, but that's the way it works, so use it. The other two, considering how well you can use this one, it's hard for them to compare, I think. Reduces the cast of Flame Strike by 1.25 seconds. Well, I never cast Flame Strike anyway. Never. I'll use it if it's Hot Streak and it's instant cast, okay. But I never cast it, so what's the point? In Tinder, if you have not cast Fireball for 8 seconds, well there's the great indicator of how crappy it is. There's a condition. If you have not done something, or if there's an if means reduced effectiveness as compared to something that is always active. Like this, for example. So this is only if you have not cast Fireball for 8 seconds, it increases its damage and reduces the cast time, blah blah blah. But after that, it's doing nothing basically. Whereas this is always doing something. And that's why you should always choose Flare Up. And on the last level here we have Fire Starter, Flame Cannon, and Greater Pyro Blast. Usually I don't take Fire Starter at all. Fireball reduces the cooldown of your combustion by 5 seconds. Okay, fine. More combustion, that's it. The other two are a bit more interesting. Flame Cannon. Okay, so if you stand still in combat, this is the drawback, okay? This is the condition that makes this one not so amazing. It's the disadvantage to it. So after standing still in combat for 2 seconds, your maximum health increases, your damage done increases, and the range of your spells increases. And it stacks up to 5 times. But that means that you have to stand still for 10 seconds before you get all 5 stacks and you get the full effectiveness of this talent. And often in PvP you have very little opportunity to stand still for 10 seconds in a row, that's for sure. So that's where this kind of loses its effectiveness. The best chance you have of using this is obviously in a battleground where you can stay at the back of the group and just, free cast and hopefully let this build up, get that extra range and damage and keep doing your pew pew. But in something like a duel or an arena, it's unlikely that you'll be able to stand still long enough to get much use out of it. And so that's where Greater Pyroblast becomes better, basically. 35% of the target's total health and fire damage is ridiculous, okay? It doesn't matter how much health they have or anything like that, 35% bye bye, see you later. So out of 5 mil health, okay, this Pyroblast is going to do about between 1.5 and 2 million damage if it doesn't crit. And that's just on me, I'm a squishy fire mage, If you're against a tank or something like that, usually they feel like they can attack with impunity because they're a tank, they got so much health and defense, blah blah blah. Well, they don't feel like that when they take a Greater Pyroblast to the face, let me tell you about that. The only problem is that it's 3.8 second cast, and you cannot use Hot Streak to cast it instantly. If you could use Hot Streak to cast this instantly, fire mages would rule all of PvP forever, basically. So there is that. It does have to be cast, and because it has a 3.8 second cast, which is quite long, you can be interrupted, you can be counterspelled while using it. So you have to bear that in mind and use it carefully. But if you can get it off, this can win fights for you very easily. So between these three, I'd probably use Flame Cannon for battlegrounds and Greater Pyroblast for everything else, and never Fire Starter, basically. And that's it for the honor talents. So the next thing that I'm going on to now is the rotation. And for Fire Mage, rotation generally revolves around getting a critical hit with Fireball or with Scorch, and then using Fire Blast or Phoenix's Flames to complete the warming up hot streak. So getting the first critical hit from Scorch or Fireball, and then completing the combo with Phoenix's Flames or Fire Blast, because they are always guaranteed to be a critical hit, and then using Pyroblast. I'm going to show you the single target rotation, and usually you start with either Pyroblast or Fireball, but realistically in most situations you don't have time to cast a Pyroblast, so I'm going to start with Fireball. And what you do is, for your burst rotation, you begin Fireball. About 75% of the way through casting, you activate Combustion and any other damage cooldowns you have. After Fireball is cast and the ball is in flight towards a target, you cast Fire Blast. Once the Fireball lands, you should have Hot Streak, so that means Pyroblast. As soon as you cast Pyroblast, you cast Fire Blast. As soon as Pyroblast lands, you should then also get Hot Streak again, Pyroblast. Hot Streak again, so Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast, Fire Blast, Pyroblast. There are no more Fire Blasts left. That's when you move on to Phoenix's Flames and Pyroblast, Phoenix's Flames and Pyroblast. Use Meteor, because then you should have a high enough Paretic incantation to get a nice bonus critical hit damage with it. And then your combo would be done. And for me, that usually rounds out at about 1.4, 1.5 million DPS and comes out at about 25, 26, 27 million damage. Just using these abilities and Meteor for the burst combo using Combustion. And so I'll show you that now. Beginning with Fireball and then activating Combustion, and then into the Fire Blast, Pyro, Phoenix's, Pyro and Meteor. And activate Combustion, there it goes. Fire Blast, Pyro, Fire Blast, Pyro, Fire Blast, Pyro, Phoenix's Flames, Pyro, Phoenix's Flames, Pyro, Meteor, Fire Blast, Pyro, Phoenix's Flames, Pyro, and done. That's pretty much the combo. So doing about 1.5 million damage, DPS, sorry, not damage. And damage done comes out at, this time with the Ignite, it came out at about 28.5 million damage. That's pretty fast. I mean, it's only versus a level 110 dummy, but you can understand in PvP that's still gonna melt people's faces basically. And that's what you want to do. As soon as you get in, you pop these two, you pop that combo, put your meteor on top after you've gone through these other spells for the bonus from Paretic Incantation, and watch people melt basically. But what do you do after that? You know, often after you've used all of your instants and you've got no charges left, you feel a bit weak as a mage, and well, as a fire mage, sorry. And that's when you then begin what I call fishing. And fishing means just using Fireball or Scorch until you have a critical hit to get warmed up, and then you finish that with Fire Blast or Phoenix's Flames. So I'll use up my Phoenix's Flames and Fire Blast just to show you what I mean. There, now it's gone. Use that Phoenix's. Okay, so I've only got one Fire Blast left, so I need a crit from either Scorch or Fireball before I use my Fire Blast. So this is fishing. There it is. Use Fire Blast, and there we go. You can use Fire Blast while casting. So I just keep casting Fireball, 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 wait for the crit, cast Fire Blast while I'm casting, and then go with the Pyroblast when it's open. And this is it. This is fishing. So because I have a Phoenix's Flames, once they're up, you know, you need to pay attention. That was a bad aiming of my meteor. Once Phoenix's Flames are up, you can also use them to finish it, but you have to be more careful with Phoenix's Flames because they're not off the global cooldown like Fire Blast is. So generally, to finish a combo with Phoenix's Flames, you want to let your Fireball or Pyroblast hit first, watch it hit, see if you get warming up, and if you do get warming up, then use the Phoenix's Flames. Alternatively, for your AoE rotation, you're going to use Living Bomb, and instead of using the Pyroblast, you're going to use Flame Strike. And at the same time, you're also going to prioritize using Phoenix's Flames first over Fire Blast, because Phoenix's Flames also does AoE damage. But otherwise, that's the only difference. Now, one thing to bear in mind, especially for raid DPS, is that you want to build up your stacks before your combustion comes back off cooldown. Now, my Fire Blast is at 8.42 second recharge, and so if I have no Fire Blasts and I have no Phoenix's Flames, I know that it will take me about 25 seconds to get all of my Fire Blast charges back. So looking at my combustion cooldown, once it gets to 25 seconds before it's back off cooldown, then I stop casting Fire Blast, basically. For Phoenix's Flames, the recharge is much longer, 45 seconds, but it's also reduced by the critical hits you do, which is this one, this one, this one, somewhere over here. There is an ability that decreases Phoenix Flames. Yeah, it's here. Targets affected by your ignite have a chance to erupt in flame, blah blah blah, reducing the remaining cooldown on Phoenix's Flame by 10 seconds. So although Phoenix's Flame says 45 seconds, actually it can be much lower than that if you get those procs with ignite. So I would say about a minute before combustion comes off cooldown is when I would stop casting Phoenix's Flames, and only 25 seconds before it comes off for Fire Blast. And that means that the second combustion comes off cooldown, I can activate it again and go through with my full burst rotation. And that's how you're going to get the highest DPS for Fire Mage. Ideally, you also want to use your burst rotation at the same time as Incanter's Flow being at 20%. So it cycles, you know, from 4% up to 20% and then back down. So if you're using your burst exactly when this hits, you know, 3, 4, or 5 stacks, getting to its highest amount of bonus damage, that's when your burst rotation is also going to do its most damage. And that is exactly how you get the highest DPS with Fire Mage at the moment anyway. So that's it for the rotation. And the last thing I just want to have a look at quickly are some little tricks that Fire Mage has. Now a nice little passive they have is Cauterize. So any fatal damage you take, 0 health basically, instead you are brought back to 35% health, and then this passive burns you for 28% of that health over 6 seconds. And while you're burning, you get super movement speed, and you can't be slowed or anything like that, so it's really easy to run away, and you leave a nice flame trail behind you while running. Okay, that's nice, but I'm not talking about specifically using this. It's not really a trick. Now, a nice trick to use with Cauterize is that when it activates and you get your 35% health back, you can immediately blink so that you start regenerating 20% of your health over 6 seconds, and after the blink you then Ice Block. Ice Block actually prevents the Cauterize damage, but it does not prevent the blink heal. So you get your 35% health back, you blink an Ice Block, and you'll probably lose maybe 5% of your health from this burn before your Ice Block activates. So then you've got 30% health for free, and you've got 20% from your blink. You're not taking any damage in Ice Block. You're just about to die, and now instead you are invulnerable in your Ice Block with 50% health. Your abilities are recharging, and you can kind of take a breather to kind of understand the situation better and see what you're going to do when you come out of the Ice Block. So it's a nice way to go from 0% back to 50% and safe, and then back to the fighting basically. Another thing is landing your meteor in PvP. So generally when you cast your meteor and there's a giant flaming circle on the ground of where it's going to land, people are not going to stand in that if they have half a brain. So to guarantee that your meteor does hit your opponent, and you do want it to hit your opponent, what you have to do is you have to cast meteor. And I'm going to say that this target dummy here is my opponent. So I'm going to cast Meteor, and then I'm going to blink, and cast Dragon's Breath immediately after blinking. So that means that I appear suddenly in front of my enemy after they just realize that the Meteor is coming, and I Dragon's Breath them so that they're disoriented for 4 seconds, they can't go anywhere, and boom, the Meteor hits. I'll show you what I mean now. So Meteor, blink, Dragon's Breath, disoriented, boom, Meteor. And that way you can guarantee the damage from Meteor, and it does a very healthy amount of damage, so you do want to make it hit as often as you can, and this is a nice little way to get that to happen. Another thing fire mages also have to be able to do is to cast while moving and jumping. Why jumping? Because when you jump, you continue moving in the direction that you were going when you started jumping, even if you turn. So I can run forward and spin, and I'm still going to go in the same direction I jumped. This means that you can run, as a fire mage, run and jump and cast your spells while moving away from the enemy. So the example I'm going to use is the target dummy here. I'm going to run away from him while also casting my spells at him and jumping. And one more time for effect. So running away, jump, face him, cast. Run away, jump, face him, cast. Run away, jump, face, cast. Run away, jump, face, cast. Like that, basically. And it's the way you can run away from your enemies while still damaging them. And this is really effective, especially against melee classes. So warrior, death knight. Rogues tend to be able to shadow step or something like that, but not all the time. So you can use this especially to your advantage. You can use it both in PvE and in PvP. And the last thing that I want to go over are the kind of special properties of Fire Blast. So Fire Blast is castable while casting any other spell, and it has no global cooldown. That means it doesn't matter what you are doing, you can cast Fire Blast, and it has no flight time. So that means if you have if you're casting a fireball and the fireball has left your hands and is flying towards your target, and you have heating up, and you want to convert that heating up into a hot streak, before your fireball lands, and let's say that your fireball was not going to be a critical hit, so not being a critical hit, it would cancel your warming up and you would have to start that again. So while the fireball is actually flying to the target, you can cast Fire Blast. Because Fire Blast has no flight time, it will hit the target even before your fireball does, even though you already cast your fireball, and then you'll guarantee the hot streak and your Pyroblast. But that's the kind of thing that you need to get more of a feel for by playing Fire Mage consistently. But you'll see for yourself, the more you play, the more you start to understand when you can use Fire Blast just before your Fireball or Pyroblast hits to get that extra hot streak, to get another Pyroblast and continue with your DPS that way. And that's it. So we've gone over all of the passives, the weapon traits that you need to be aware of, the talents and honor talents, and which ones are useful for which situation. the rotation both for single target and AoE DPS, and some of the little tricks that you can use with Fire Mage. So I hope this has helped you to understand Fire Mage a bit better and hopefully improve the way you play Fire Mage. Thank you for watching. This is Game Education. Come back next time.